There are moments in life that split you in half, the life you lived before it happened, and the life you're forced to live after. For me, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I discovered that the man I had trusted for over a decade had quietly stolen the one thing I thought we built together, our home. My name is Marissa Dalton. I'm 36, a real estate paralegal by trade, and up until a few months ago, I was married to a man named Jared, charming, driven, and, as it turns out, a complete fraud. We met 12 years ago at a friend's engagement party. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made it feel warmer, brighter. He had this easy laugh and the kind of charisma that made you forget to question things. I was drawn to him instantly, and maybe that was my first mistake. Jared worked in finance, though the specifics were always a little vague. Consulting, he'd say, waving it off as too boring to explain. I never pushed for more. At the time, I was just starting my career as a junior paralegal at a real estate law firm, buried in contracts and title documents. The last thing I wanted was more paperwork in my personal life. We got married 2 years after we met and bought our home in year 3. A charming 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet Connecticut suburb. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours, or so I believed. Things were good for a while. We traveled, hosted dinner parties, binge-watched bad television on rainy weekends. Jared talked about starting a family, though we never quite got there. "Let's enjoy us for a little longer," he'd say, and I'd nod, pretending not to notice the growing gaps in his schedule or the increasing number of client emergencies that kept him out late. The truth is, I stopped asking questions a long time ago. Then, about 6 months ago, the cracks started to show. I came home early one day, my meeting had been cancelled, and I was in the mood to surprise him with lunch. But when I pulled into the driveway, there was an unfamiliar black Audi parked in his usual spot. I didn't recognize it, but I told myself it must be a colleague's. I walked in through the side door, quiet as I always was, and heard muffled voices coming from the living room. I didn't catch the whole conversation, just enough to make my stomach drop. She'll never know unless someone tells her. It's airtight. A woman's voice. I stood frozen for a moment, then backed out the door like a coward. I didn't confront him that day. Or the next. Instead, I waited. I started watching more closely, his phone habits, the names that popped up on his screen, the vague business trips. I wasn't just paranoid. I was finally paying attention. Then, 2 weeks later, came the real betrayal. I was preparing closing paperwork for a client when I needed to reference a sample deed from a previous file. For convenience, I pulled up the deed to our own property, which had been processed through my firm 3 years ago when we refinanced. But what I saw made my blood turn to ice. The ownership was no longer joint. The new deed listed Jared Dalton, sole owner. There was no mention of me. No tenants by the entirety, no joint tenancy. Just him. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I told myself there had to be an error in the records. But the more I dug, the worse it got. There was a new deed, filed 8 months prior. It included what appeared to be my signature. Neat, practiced, and utterly fake. I printed a copy and stared at it for nearly an hour. My name, in cursive, perfectly forged. My heart pounded as if I'd been physically struck. I didn't cry. Not yet. I'm not sure I even breathed. Instead, I did what I always do when I feel like I'm falling apart. I got to work. I requested a certified copy from the county recorder. I compared signatures, examined timestamps, traced the notary's credentials. It was a legitimate filing, at least on paper. But every instinct in me knew, Jared had forged my name, removed me from the deed, and did it behind my back. When I finally confronted him that night, I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I waited until dinner, when he was sitting across from me chewing grilled salmon and sipping his usual whiskey. "There's something wrong with the deed," I said calmly, my eyes locked on his. He blinked. "What?" "To the house. Our house. I pulled it up for work, and it says you're the sole owner. It used to be joint." Do you know anything about that? He hesitated for just a second, just long enough for me to know I was right. Then, like the trained liar he was, he smiled. Oh, that? Yeah, the lawyer recommended we do that for tax purposes. I meant to tell you. You meant to tell me that you filed a new deed without my knowledge? It was just a formality. You signed it, didn't you? I leaned back, my stomach twisting. No, Jared. I didn't. He laughed nervously, brushing it off. Well, you must have. Maybe you just don't remember. It was months ago. I slid the printed deed across the table. This is your idea of a formality? He stared at it, expression hardening. Look, don't make a big deal out of nothing. It's still our house. No, I said, standing slowly. According to this, it's your house. And you forged my name to make it that way. That was when the mask cracked. Just for a moment. His face turned cold. You really want to go down this road? I stared at him, numb and steady. Oh, I already started walking. Over the next week, things between us became icy. He stopped pretending. No more apologies, no more weak explanations. We barely spoke. We slept in separate rooms, avoided each other in the kitchen. The air in the house was thick with tension. But he underestimated me. Jared always did. He thought because I didn't scream or threaten, I was backing down. But I was building something, a case, a plan, a way out. I consulted with a friend from law school, quietly, discreetly. She confirmed what I feared: unless I could prove the signature was forged, legally, the house belonged to Jared. But, she added, if he used a notary who didn't actually witness the signature, or paid one to look the other way, you might have leverage. I went digging, deep. I contacted the notary listed on the deed. A woman named Colleen Russo. I told her I was doing a quality check for past filings and asked about the signing. She was polite, even cheerful. Oh, that one? Yes, Jared brought the documents. Said you had a family emergency and couldn't be there in person, but you had signed ahead of time. He showed me your ID to verify. My heart sank. He showed you my ID? Yes. He said he was your husband, so it made sense. Is something wrong? No, I lied. Thank you for your time. It was worse than I thought. Jared had used my ID, maybe even made a copy without my permission, and tricked a notary into validating a forged document. That was enough for fraud. Maybe even criminal charges. But I didn't want to involve the police. Not yet. I wanted something better. I wanted to sell the house. Legally, I couldn't. My name wasn't on the deed. But I knew the system. I knew the loopholes. And most importantly, I knew Jared. Jared had been sloppy in other areas. The house wasn't just his prize, it was his collateral. He had taken out a quiet second mortgage 6 months earlier. I found it in the county records, buried behind layers of shell LLCs. He was using our house to float some failing venture. If I made the right move, I could force a sale without ever touching the deed. So, I waited. I played nice. I acted as though I had moved past it, focused on work, stayed out late a few nights to make it believable. And while Jared thought I was slipping away emotionally, I was moving mountains behind the scenes. I contacted the lender. Posed as a title officer reviewing active liens. Learned the terms of the secondary loan. Discovered that Jared had fallen behind, by 3 months. The property was one step away from foreclosure. That's when I made my move. Using a close colleague at a third-party brokerage, I posed as an agent with an interested buyer. Jared was desperate, he needed the cash, and fast. I had the offer structured through a friend's real estate trust, so he'd never know it traced back to me. He agreed to sell. He signed the paperwork. Accepted the funds. And walked away thinking he'd salvaged his mess. I watched him from the upstairs window the day the moving truck pulled away. He stood on the curb, talking on the phone, his voice clipped and frustrated. He still didn't know. He wouldn't, not for a while. And when he finally did, when he realized who had bought the house he stole, it would be too late. Because I wasn't just reclaiming bricks and walls. I was taking back every piece of myself he thought he could erase. There's a very particular kind of satisfaction that comes from watching a liar fall into his own trap, a calm, deliberate pleasure in seeing justice unfold not in a courtroom, but in the silence of their own undoing. I didn't just want to win. I wanted Jared to feel the full weight of what he'd done. To know, deep in his bones, that he didn't lose the house by accident. He lost it because he tried to steal it from me. The sale went through without a hitch. I made sure of that. My friend Cameron, a licensed broker I've known since college, facilitated the entire process through a shell trust, Delaney Holdings LLC. A name Jared wouldn't recognize if it screamed in his face. The buyer was a fictitious wealthy investor from Massachusetts, represented on paper by another associate from my law firm. I had rehearsed every piece of this play like a director preparing for opening night. The contracts, the title transfer, the wire transfers, everything legal, airtight, and clean. Jared never saw me behind it. Why would he? As far as he knew, I had backed off. Quietly bitter but ultimately defeated. He underestimated me again. The final documents were signed on a Wednesday. Jared had his check by Friday, over $300,000 after the second mortgage and taxes were settled. He didn't even flinch at the expedited close. I'd made the offer aggressive enough that he saw dollar signs instead of red flags. That weekend, he started packing. I watched him from the spare bedroom as he wrapped his expensive scotch in bubble wrap and barked at movers to be careful with his investment art. It was hilarious, honestly, watching him strut around with a smug little smirk, like he'd just outmaneuvered the universe. I didn't help him pack. I barely spoke. He didn't ask why. Jared assumed my silence was weakness. That I'd accepted my fate as a woman displaced from the home she once shared with her husband. He even left me a note on the kitchen counter that last morning. No hard feelings. You'll land on your feet. Maybe now we can both have a clean start. I laughed when I read it. A deep, sharp laugh that startled even me. Because Jared still didn't know. He had sold the house, to me. Technically, Delaney Holdings LLC held the deed. But I controlled the trust, the managing member, and every damn penny involved in the transaction. I hadn't lost the house, I'd simply bought it again, this time with full ownership and none of his fingerprints left behind. But I wasn't done yet. 3 weeks after he left, I changed the locks. Not because I had to, but because it felt symbolic, like sealing a tomb. I repainted the front door a deep navy blue. Tossed the old welcome mat. Burned the sheets from our bedroom in a steel barrel out back. I also started investigating the rest of Jared's finances. Because here's the thing, people like Jared don't commit one crime. They build a lifestyle on deception. And once I saw through one lie, it became easy to see the others. The second mortgage wasn't the only debt he had racked up. His personal credit was maxed. He defaulted on a private loan with a business partner in Boston. Worse, he had used my name as a reference on a rental application without my permission. That was the final straw. I drove to the rental office of the building he'd moved into, some overpriced high-rise filled with corporate bachelors and Instagram influencers. I asked to speak to the manager, introduced myself as Jared's ex-wife, and calmly explained that my name had been fraudulently used in a credit application. They pulled the file. My name was there. Along with a falsified joint bank statement showing our shared income. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I handed them my attorney's card and left. Jared called me 2 days later, raging. It was the first time he had spoken to me since moving out. You seriously reported me to my landlord? Don't use my name again, I said flatly. For anything. Ever. You're unbelievable. You're still bitter about the house, aren't you? You just can't move on. I smiled. I already did. You're the one clinging to things you no longer own. He hung up. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of red wine, curled up on the couch, and watched the security footage from the front camera I had recently installed. Jared had tried to come back. He walked up the steps with that same smug swagger, tried his old key, and when it didn't work, he actually knocked. I didn't answer. He stood there for a while, arms crossed, staring at the door like it owed him something. Then he turned, walked away, and hasn't been back since. But this story isn't just about getting the house back. It's about pulling the last thread from a man's empire of lies and watching it unravel. A month after the house sale, I was contacted by someone unexpected, Vanessa. She was the woman whose voice I'd overheard in the living room months ago, the client or colleague who had called Jared's bluff. She emailed me out of nowhere. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I think we've both been lied to." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Hi Marissa, I'm not sure how much you know, but I was involved with Jared until a few weeks ago. He told me you were separated. That the house was his. That you were unstable and had walked away from everything. He even showed me a copy of the deed. But now I know the truth. I saw your name on the original paperwork. I saw everything. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I think he's done this before, to other women. You're not the first. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Vanessa. I sat there in stunned silence. It was one thing to suspect an affair. It was another to read the words of the woman who had taken my place in Jared's lies. She wasn't a villain, just another pawn. Like me. I did meet with Vanessa, a week later, at a quiet coffee shop downtown. She was younger than I expected, late 20s, maybe. Sharp, stylish, with a look of someone who'd just realized the man she loved was a stranger. He said he was building a new life, she said, stirring her untouched cappuccino. That you were emotionally manipulative. That the house was his way of starting over. He told me we were renovating, I said dryly. While he was stealing it. Vanessa laughed, bitterly. He's a sociopath. I used to think he was just ambitious. Now I think he's dangerous. That conversation opened a door I hadn't planned to walk through. Vanessa had receipts, literally. Screenshots of bank transfers, texts, documents he'd emailed her for advice. Things he shouldn't have shared. Including spreadsheets from his business ventures. They were riddled with inconsistencies. And one of them led me to a name I recognized, Tech Ventures, a tech incubator Jared once mentioned during a dinner party as a silent partnership. Turns out, Jared wasn't silent. He was the funnel. Tech had taken investor money and moved it through various shell companies, many of which listed Jared as a manager, signer, or agent of record. I had no intention of blowing the whistle immediately. But I did quietly pass the documents to a friend at the SEC. No names, just a tip. And then I waited. Jared didn't implode overnight. These things take time. But slowly, the walls began to close in. His credit tanked. His landlord threatened eviction after 2 missed payments. One of his investors filed suit for breach of contract. And then, 3 months later, the FBI showed up at his door. I didn't see it happen. But Vanessa did. She texted me the day of the raid. No words, just a photo of Jared being led away in cuffs. I stared at that image for a long, long time. I don't believe in karma. But I believe in consequences. And Jared finally got his. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a storm, not peace exactly, but a vacuum. As if the world is catching its breath after something violent. That's how it felt after Jared's arrest. For the first time in months, my phone didn't buzz with tension. My thoughts didn't spin like a carousel of betrayal. He was gone. The house was mine. And yet, I didn't feel finished. Because I still didn't know why. Why had he gone through so much trouble? Why risk his career, our marriage, even prison? What was it about that house, that name on the deed, that made him so desperate? What was he hiding? I started digging. Not out of obsession, out of instinct. I'm a lawyer. Truth has gravity. Even when it's buried, it pulls. I began with public records. Jared had always kept things complicated, as he put it, with multiple LLCs and trusts. Most were inactive, defunct shells created for real estate ventures that never existed. But one entity stood out, Alberon Financial Group, incorporated 4 years ago in Delaware under a business partner's name. The partner? A man named Elias Marrow. The name meant nothing to me at first. But when I pulled Elias's corporate filings, something jumped out. A property deed. Not for our house, but for another address in Maine. A lake house. I remembered it vaguely. Jared once mentioned his parents had a cabin there when he was young. He said it was sold years ago after his father passed. But the deed was clear, Alberon Financial had acquired the property 18 months ago. Jared was listed as a co-manager on the LLC. So why lie? I rented a car that weekend and drove north. The lake house was hidden deep in the woods, perched on a quiet, glassy inlet. No neighbors. No street lights. Just forest and fog and silence. It looked abandoned, but not forgotten, weathered, but intact. The kind of place you could disappear into. There was no lock on the front door. Inside, it was cold. The air smelled like dust and pine. Furniture draped in sheets. A fireplace filled with old ash. I walked slowly, listening to the creaks under my boots, feeling like I was trespassing in a life I never knew existed. Then I found the study. Behind the desk, in a locked drawer, I found it, a metal cash box. Inside were 2 passports, one in Jared's name, one fake under the alias Greg Miller. There were also money orders totaling over $75,000, 3 untraceable burner phones, and a burner laptop. He had an escape plan. Not just a getaway, but a full-on new identity. A new life. And I hadn't been a part of it. I turned on the laptop. No password. It booted up to a simple desktop with a single folder labeled Octavia. Inside were spreadsheets, transaction ledgers, email drafts. Some encrypted. Some not. What I saw made my blood run cold. Jared hadn't just been siphoning money through shady LLCs. He had been laundering funds through shell charities, fake nonprofits created under the guise of tech education for underserved youth, clean energy innovation, and veteran support programs. The money, millions, had been routed to shell accounts overseas. And the names on the board of directors? All fake. Or dead. He was part of a ring. A full-scale white-collar operation involving multiple co-conspirators. And somehow, I had lived next to that monster for 6 years. Back in Boston, the headlines were starting to catch up. Local tech consultant arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud investigation. FBI probes alleged charity scam with international ties. They didn't name Jared immediately. But they would. And when they did, I would be ready. Because now I had everything, the paper trail, the aliases, the timeline, the assets. And more importantly, I had leverage. It was the middle of the night when Vanessa called me. "Have you seen the news?" she whispered. "I have. They're saying he could do 20 years. Good." There was a pause. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "What if he gets out? What if he finds us?" "He won't," I said firmly. "He's not getting out anytime soon." But even as I said it, I opened my safe and checked the gun inside. Loaded. Legal. Locked. Jared was dangerous. Not in the physical sense, he'd never laid a hand on me, but in the way a serpent is dangerous. Coiled. Silent. Calculated. And I had struck first. 2 weeks passed. Then came the subpoena. I was named as a witness in the federal case. The assistant U.S. attorney assigned to the case, a sharp, methodical woman named Rachel Yoon, called me personally. "We've reviewed the materials you submitted," she said. "They're damning. Your husband left a long trail of digital breadcrumbs." "He's not my husband anymore," I stand corrected. "Your ex-husband." She chuckled softly. "We're issuing indictments for 6 others. But Jared was the hub. Without him, the wheel doesn't turn." "What do you need from me?" "Testimony. And clarity on your financial exposure. You were listed as a joint account holder on several assets." "I was." "Not anymore." She paused. "You do realize that if you hadn't acted when you did, selling the house, moving the funds, you might have been indicted too?" "I know. Most people wouldn't have seen it in time." "You did." "Because I knew something he didn't," I said. "What's that?" I smiled. "Never underestimate the woman who knows where the bodies are buried." That summer, I started to breathe again. Not deeply. Not fully. But enough. I resumed work, taking on new clients. I traveled alone for the first time in years. I watched sunsets from the back porch of a house that was finally, truly, mine. People asked questions. Friends. Coworkers. Even my parents. What happened to Jared? He lost everything, I would say simply. But the truth is, he gave it away. Piece by piece. Lie by lie. Until all that remained was the hollow man underneath. And when he tried to take me down with him, I did what women have always done when the world turns against them. I rebuilt. But not quietly. And not with mercy. The summer of truth is never gentle. It hits like a firestorm, scorching everything in its path, forcing you to either burn or rise from the ashes. For me, it was no different. The moment Jared's arrest became public, the fragile world I had built began to shake. Friends disappeared. Some never called back. Others whispered behind my back, eyes full of pity or suspicion. "Did you know?" they asked, as if the answer would change the past or rewrite the betrayal. I could only shake my head and keep moving forward. But the hardest part was the fallout at work. Jared had been a partner at our law firm, not just any partner, but one of the founding partners. His charm, his connections, the prestige that came with his name, it all meant something. The firm was terrified of being associated with a criminal scandal, especially one so brazen and so close to home. Within days, the managing partner called me into a sterile conference room. The air smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. "Marissa," he said, avoiding my gaze, "this situation with Jared, it's complicated." I nodded, already knowing what was coming. "We have to discuss your position here." I held my breath. "You're a valuable lawyer," he continued, "but we need to protect the firm's reputation. For now, we're placing you on leave until this clears up." I left the building with my head held high but my heart sinking. A leave of absence wasn't a firing, but it was close enough. At home, I fought the loneliness. The nights were the worst, silent, endless stretches where my thoughts chased their tails. I replayed every conversation, every look Jared gave me, searching for signs I'd missed. But it was no use. He had worn a mask so well that even I, his wife, had been fooled. Then came the letter. It was handwritten, on thick cream stationery, the kind you don't use for everyday notes. The envelope had no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. "Marissa, if you're reading this, then the past few months have been everything I feared. You're probably wondering why I did what I did. Why I betrayed you, the family, everyone who trusted me. The truth is, I was scared. Not of jail or losing money. Of losing control. You think you won, selling the house, exposing me, but this isn't over. I'm sorry for everything. But remember, some debts can't be paid with money alone." The letter slipped through my fingers, and a cold chill ran down my spine. Jared was not done. Not by a long shot. I knew I had to act fast. Rachel Yoon and her team were making progress with the case, but it wasn't enough. Jared had ties I didn't understand yet. Allies in shadows. And if I didn't expose them, he might find a way out. I reached out to Vanessa, who was my anchor through all of this. We started digging into Jared's old contacts, social media traces, and business associates. Every name was a thread that could unravel the web. One evening, as we pored over an encrypted folder on my laptop, a name flashed repeatedly: Dominic Voss. Dominic was a financier with a murky reputation, known for laundering money for high-profile criminals. Jared's emails hinted at meetings, contracts, and something called Project Octavia. Curious and terrified, I made a call. The man who answered was nothing like Jared. Dominic's voice was gravelly and cold, his words clipped and measured. "I know who you are, Marissa. Your husband's ex-wife. And I know what you want. I want to know the truth. You're playing a dangerous game. Jared was a small piece. There are bigger players. Then I want to meet them." There was silence. "Meet me in Boston. Tomorrow night. No police. No surprises." The meeting took place at a dimly lit, upscale bar downtown. I arrived early, nerves twisting in my stomach. Vanessa insisted on coming, but I refused. This was my fight. Dominic was waiting, dressed in a tailored suit that looked like it had never seen a day of real work. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "You're brave," he said. "Or desperate." He slid an envelope across the table. "Inside are the names and accounts linked to Project Octavia. Follow the money, Marissa, and you'll find what Jared never wanted you to see." I opened it carefully. The list was extensive: offshore accounts, fake companies, coded transactions. This was bigger than fraud. This was a criminal empire. Back home, I worked day and night, compiling evidence, connecting dots, and preparing for what I hoped would be the final blow. I called Rachel. "This is bigger than we thought," I said. "We need more resources." She agreed to escalate the case, and federal agents began raids on properties and businesses tied to the names on the list. Meanwhile, Jared's lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution was relentless. But the story wasn't over. Late one night, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "You think you're safe? Watch your back." I didn't sleep that night. The reckoning had truly begun. The threat hung in the air like a fog, thick, cold, and impossible to ignore. I kept replaying the text over and over, the words burning in my mind: "You think you're safe? Watch your back." The message was clear. Jared, or someone connected to him, was watching me. And they wanted me to know it. I told Vanessa immediately. She was furious but practical, insisting I take precautions. Security cameras went up around my house, my phone was replaced with a burner, and I stopped going out alone. My world had shrunk into a cage of caution, but I refused to let fear win. Days later, as I worked tirelessly compiling the evidence against Jared and his network, I noticed strange activity on my email. Phishing attempts, anonymous calls, even a night where someone tried to break into my car. It was becoming a war zone, and I was the battleground. But I had allies. Rachel Yoon and her team were making strides. Federal agents had raided several of Jared's shell companies, freezing assets and uncovering layers of deceit. The empire he'd built was crumbling, piece by piece. One afternoon, Rachel invited me to a secure meeting room downtown. She handed me a thick file. "We've identified one of Jared's closest partners, a man named Calvin Hart. He's cooperating with us. Turns out he's the key to bringing the whole network down." Calvin Hart was a name I hadn't seen before, but Rachel explained he was Jared's former CFO, the man who managed the money laundering schemes from the inside. With his testimony, they could finally connect all the dots and ensure Jared would never see the light of day again. The courtroom was packed the day Calvin took the stand. Watching him testify was surreal. The man who once held the keys to Jared's secret empire now spilled every dark detail: offshore accounts, fake charities, falsified documents. His voice was steady but laced with regret. He told me to move money through every channel possible, Calvin said. He wanted control over everything. The house, the assets, even the lives around him. I sat at the back, heart pounding, as the prosecutor grilled Calvin on the stand. Each revelation was another nail in Jared's coffin. After the testimony, Rachel pulled me aside. "We're ready to file the final charges. Jared's facing decades, minimum." It felt like justice. Like the scales were finally balanced. But the price was high. Friends who had once comforted me now crossed the street when they saw me. My parents were torn, proud but heartbroken over the man Jared had become. And Vanessa grew quiet, her usual fiery spirit dimmed by the constant threat looming over us. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed again. A new message, this time a photo. It was a picture of our daughter, Lily, at school, taken from across the street. The sender? Unknown. My hands trembled. I called Vanessa immediately. "We have to protect Lily," I said, voice tight. Vanessa nodded. "I've already contacted a security firm. She'll have an escort to and from school starting tomorrow." Despite the fear, I refused to be broken. Jared wanted to control me through fear, but I was stronger than that. Every threat only made me more determined to end this nightmare. The next weeks were a blur of court hearings, security meetings, and late nights. But then, unexpectedly, a breakthrough. Calvin Hart reached out to me personally. "There's something you need to know," he said over a secure line. Jared wasn't working alone. He named names, other powerful figures in finance and politics who had a stake in the fraud scheme. Suddenly, the case exploded into something bigger than just Jared. I was in deeper than I ever imagined. The final showdown came fast. Federal agents executed coordinated raids on multiple locations. The media dubbed it the largest financial fraud bust in the city's history. Jared's name was everywhere, and the man I once loved was reduced to a cautionary tale of greed and deception. As the dust settled, I stood in the courtroom one last time, watching Jared being sentenced. 25 years, the judge declared. He looked at me once, his eyes hollow but burning with something I couldn't name. I didn't flinch. Months later, as I walked through my front door, this time truly free, I knew the story wasn't just about betrayal or loss. It was about survival. About taking back control. And about never letting anyone steal your future. The days after Jared's sentencing felt surreal, like waking up from a long nightmare and finding myself in a strange, quiet world. The weight of betrayal and danger had lifted, but the wreckage it left behind was mine to clean up. I realized then that surviving was only the beginning. The real challenge was rebuilding my life, my future, and most importantly, my daughter's. Lily was my anchor. Watching her run through the garden, full of life and laughter despite the chaos we'd endured, reminded me why I fought so hard. She deserved a fresh start, away from lies and shadows. But that meant I had to become someone new, stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand on my own. The house I had sold was gone, but Vanessa helped me find a small, cozy condo nearby. It wasn't grand or lavish, but it was ours. A place where Lily could grow up without fear, and I could finally breathe. I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. The law firm eventually welcomed me back, this time with genuine respect. The nightmare of Jared's deception had, ironically, opened doors for me. I was promoted to lead a new department focused on fraud prevention, a chance to protect others from the kind of betrayal I had suffered. But healing was not a straight path. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when memories of Jared's lies and the stolen years haunted me. I questioned everything, my judgment, my trust, even my worth. Therapy sessions became a lifeline. Slowly, I began to peel back the layers of pain, learning to forgive myself for what I hadn't seen. Vanessa was my rock through it all. We celebrated small victories, Lily's first recital, my first major case won post-trial, and shared quiet moments of hope. Our friendship deepened into something unbreakable. Then, one unexpected day, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photograph of Jared, looking broken and alone behind bars. On the back, a message in familiar handwriting: "You won't get away with this." For a moment, fear stirred again. But it was weaker this time. I folded the photo and set it aside, refusing to give him power over me anymore. Instead, I focused on the future. The hardest part was rebuilding trust, not just with others, but with myself. I started dating again, tentatively at first. Meeting new people reminded me that life could still be joyful, full of possibilities. Lily thrived in school, making friends and exploring her passions. I enrolled her in art classes and soccer, watching with pride as she blossomed. Years passed, and the wounds began to heal. I never forgot the lessons Jared taught me about deception, resilience, and the power of reclaiming your story. Sometimes, I catch myself smiling when I think of how far we've come. The house may be gone, but the life we built, from pain, courage, and determination, is stronger than ever. This is not just a story of betrayal. It's a story of survival and hope.